You're listening to the Mind Flipping Podcast, where you'll find tools and tips to help you renovate and update your mind and life.
Marci, welcome to the Mind Flipping Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. As always, I'm excited, and I say as always because I just have the best guests, and you fall into the best guest category.
Thank you.
We chatted a little bit before I click record. I've looked at your stuff, and one of the things that our listeners are just now hearing that you and I chatted about is feel a connection with you because you remind me of my daughter and that you're sensitive. I saw on your website that cats have been following you for years.
Yes.
You like birds, you like nature. But more than that, you're an energy healer, an intuitive coach. I guess if you're at that cocktail party, how do you describe yourself and what you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's always interesting because, especially where I live in Washington, D.C., people are not expecting what I do to be what it is that I do. So I tell people I'm an intuitive coach and healer, and that I help people, sensitive souls, reconnect to their intuition, their forgotten intuitive nature, and learn how to both hear and trust their inner voice so that they can actually live and embody their truth.
So when you tell that to people, I can imagine in Washington, D.C., that you get some like blank stares, right?
Yes.
And some
I think
people,
it's kind of like a come again.
right. And others probably light up because something in that they say, "Oh, that's me," right? Because that's a great description. And there you probably get great questions. Well, I don't know that I'm sensitive, but I would love to tap into my intuition, and a variation of questions. So, what are the common follow-ups to that intro to you and what you do? And
Yeah, so people will ask me several questions like, what is intuition? Like, well, what is intuition to you? And so I'll talk to them about, well, for me, intuition is really reconnecting to that wise part inside of ourselves, tuning into that inner guidance system. I always joke that we spend all of our time Googling outside of ourselves. And so reconnecting to intuition is learning how to Google inside of yourself to your own internal guidance system and GPS. And people will also ask me usually, well, how does that work exactly? What do you mean? What is it like? What happens when you're in a session with someone, or what kind of issues do you work on? I don't even know how to think about that, And I think sometimes people immediately think of the neon psychic sign that they may see somewhere on the street. Are you like one of those, or what exactly is this intuitive thing that you do? And so then I will tell them, that I'll do this process that I'll take people through where we explore the conscious layers of their mind. And then once we reach the limitations of that to get them clarity, we then dive into what I would say is the subconscious and unconscious parts of their mind. And I do that through intuitive practices. I do that through my own intuitive process that then plugs them into their intuitive selves, and that helps relieve blocks around fears, heal unhealed past wounding, particularly from childhood experiences, sometimes accessing past life experiences that are seeking resolution or recognition to understand certain patterns, working with ancestors or ancestral patterns to heal those pieces. So that's usually what I'll say, which then people usually are just sitting wide-eyed like, wow, I always hear, I've never met anyone that does that before, which is fun because it's always an interesting conversation. And then people usually have a million questions after that.
yeah. Yeah. As a hypnotherapist, I get that too, that what? I've never met one. And
Yes.
which can be, kind of cool. It depends where the conversation goes after that. But you said, so you have your own practices. And so I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this can go any way you want, but that there are skills that you improved upon, that you practiced, that you then are kind of like a hand holder where you pull them along, teaching them similar skills to tap into their intuition?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's both me practices that I learned through my own process of just doing a bazillion hours of trying to figure out what on earth was happening for me in my life, because I had reached this point in my 20s where I recognized that I had achieved a lot, but I felt very, very unfulfilled. I felt really lost, and it was a very confusing experience because on paper I was successful. On paper I had a great life. But internally, I felt very disconnected from that on paper success. So through that process, I learned different practices. I intuitively found different practices. I made up practices that ended up working for me, kind of a combination of all those pieces. So I use them to guide people through a process that then some of those practices they can use themselves, and other parts of them is more like me holding a container for them and guiding that container so that then they can get to their answer. So I would say it's both. It's both practices that they learn and then can implement themselves, and then other pieces, kind of like as a hypnotherapist, it's like you're not being an hypnotherapist with people so then they can go just like hypnotize themselves. So it's both sides of the coin is what happens for me.
Okay. Which brings up the question that you probably get asked is this something you're born with? Can I get better at it? And it's probably a little bit of both.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love when people ask that question, because that tells me that they're open and curious. A lot of times people will just flat out say, well, I'm not intuitive. And I would say, I'm not so sure. I actually believe everyone has a propensity to be intuitive. I believe all children that come into this plane of existence are naturally intuitive beings. But it's just like, I love this analogy, and I give credit to my partner, because when we were talking about this before many years ago, he's the one that kind of described this to me when I was trying to help him understand who I am and how I understand the world, and why is it that I am so intuitive and he's intuitive, but to less a degree. And he had this like light bulb went off in his head, and he said, oh, it's like math. It's like math, right? And I said, yeah, totally. It's like math, because he can do really, really advanced math. He's an engineer, and he, studied calculus. And for me, it's like at a certain point in math in my process, I was just kind of done with math. I didn't have an interest in it. I didn't have a natural propensity for it. Everyone can generally do some kind of math, right? And when you do more practice, the math gets easier and you can increase your skills. And then there are some people that are just naturally really good at math. And then some of us that are kind of like, not so much. And so I feel like intuition is the same way. All of us can have an intuitive experience of life. All of us can access our intuition. And then some of us are just more like the calculus, rocket science level talent of intuition. And it just comes easier to us. So that ended up being the case for me, which was honestly really surprising for me. I wasn't expecting that to be who I am, but now it makes total sense.
So what do you mean it was surprising to you?
I always tell people I'm a reluctant intuitive,
Okay.
It's,
You're like,
yeah, yes. And it's popular for people now. The word intuitive is getting more popular, and there are a lot of people that seek out to become intuitives or to become healers, to go through like all these formal trainings. That's not what happened to me. It was more like this calling that the universe kind of gently pulled me towards, and then aggressively like pursued me, I would say, that I just couldn't avoid. And I was very, very reluctant towards it, because what had happened to me as a child, I was very deeply intuitive, but I didn't know that that's what it was. That's just who I was, right? That's what often happens for many of us who have a natural propensity for intuitive gifts. We just kind of are naturally intuitive. We don't think about it. In my case, I didn't have a context for it, right? So I didn't have a family that had language for it, versus one of my, dear friends over the years. She grew up in Sri Lanka, and there was context for these kind of experiences that I had. It was completely normal to see people's auras. There was a context for past lives. There was a context for people experiencing spirits, seeing spirits, knowing that they have a wider, higher self. They have a wisdom inside of them. I didn't have any of that context. So I didn't know where to locate my experiences. And I didn't think much about it until I had this situation where I knew I had precognition that my great-grandmother was going to pass. And as a child, that's a lot to be with, you know?
Wow.
And so I tried to urge my parents to allow us to travel and go see her, because I knew how important she was to my mom. And my parents at the time just, I think they didn't know what to think of it. I don't think I said, I know grandma's going to die. I just said, I know we need to go see her, like now. And they didn't understand why I was so panicked.
Yeah.
So after that experience, and we didn't go, and then the next morning we got the phone call that I was not surprised about, that she had passed. It was a very confusing experience for me to see my parents very upset, my mom completely heartbroken, thinking, oh my gosh, my mom is really upset. I'm not really fully formative into the understanding of death at that point, and going, wait a minute, did I cause this death? Did me knowing this information cause this death?
Right.
And what's interesting is that I actually relived that same experience in a different way as an adult, which then became my final, I would say, initiation into my intuitive gifts, which was when my grandmother passed. And it was a similar experience, that I knew she was going to be passing. But not only did I know she was going to be passing, I knew that she actually needed my help to transition, because my grandfather had started visiting me and giving me messages that she wasn't going to let go until I actually stepped in and did this process, which is what happened.
And your grandfather, who had already passed, was visiting you.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, all of that experience, that formative experience with my great grandmother passing, instilled some fear in me. And then you have the layer of, like Hollywood movies, that the unexplainable is always scary. Very rarely do you have a film about people it's different now, but at least when I was growing up, there was not very many films about people being intuitive or psychic and it being something interesting and beautiful. It was scary or a con artist. And so that felt scary. So I just over time started turning it off. So then later in my adult years, when I was doing all of this deep healing work after I'd gotten really lost, right? That moment of realizing, what did I do with my life? Who am I? What's happening? And I did all this deep healing work. Those intuitive gifts cracked back open again without me really seeking it. And then it became this process of kind of moving through those fears and going, oh my gosh, I don't want to be seen as crazy. I don't want to be seen as causing problems. I don't want to tap into things that are bad. And so for a long time, I was just very, very reluctant, until I reached a point where I just didn't feel like I had a choice anymore. And then recognized that for me to truly serve like I'm called to serve, not only myself, but other people, I had to fully embrace it. And I finally, I feel like there was like one tiny thread still hanging on when the lead up to my grandmother's passing. And when she passed, it's kind of like that last thread of any holding back got torn off at that point.
Was it because it felt so good? It felt so right, finally?
It was like, it's because of, for me, that final thread came because of how much healing I saw that occurred in my family from leaning into that gift. I mean, basically leading up to her passing, I had been receiving messages for months, and I was going back to visit her often. She was in kind of like a nursing home situation, like assisted living nursing home kind of situation. And so I was going back to visit her often to see how she was doing. And I had been receiving messages during that time that I was meant to give her the message, it's safe for you to transition. And when it first came to me, it's literally like I wanted to just shake it out of my head. I wanted it to go away, because I thought, listen, I'm know how this went last time, but like maybe even worse. I'm not going to do this thing again. And I literally would have conversation before I knew it was coming from my grandfather. I just kept getting this intuitive message over and over and over again. And I kept saying, I'm sorry, you have to find somebody else. I can't do this. And then he started making himself known, like, no, I'm the one delivering the message. This is why you have to deliver it. And I kept saying to him, I can't do this. You're asking me to do too much. This is a big responsibility. I feel like I don't know. And I would then reconcile with it. And then I'd go visit her and I'd be staring into her eyes. And then really the little little bits of the child in me would kind of freeze up and not say what I came there to say.
Sure.
And then I'd leave, and then I'd cry because I'd say, oh no, I didn't say the thing I said was supposed to say, and I didn't have this conversation with her, and she was having a lot of fear and anxiety at the end of her life. So for me, it came full circle when I finally, like, every angle that I tried to get somebody else to do it. I tried to get a mentor to be the intervener. I tried everything, and I just, every step of the way, it was broken and blocked. And so it finally came to a point for me where I ended up having a dream that my grandfather was sitting outside of their old house, and nobody else in the dream could see him except for my cousin's children. So the cousin's children could see him and were spending time with him, and then he could see me, and he made eye contact with me, and he transmitted this message to say, tell her I'm waiting outside. I'm waiting for her. She has to cross over. Let her know that I'm going to be there on the other side. And then all of these series of texts had been happening in my family about her condition. And I just felt this really weird impulse to tell my dream. So I told my mom, and my mom said, wow, I don't know why, but I feel like you need to tell your aunt, who was her main caregiver and watching her at that point. So I told my aunt, and my aunt said, call me immediately. I called her, and she said, the hair on my arms is standing up right now, because what you're describing from your dream is exactly what Grandma was describing she was seeing yesterday.
Wow.
And she said, I just thought it was a hallucination. And it was this recognition, because my grandma was really upset and anxious, and kept saying, why is he not coming to get me?
Wow.
Why is he not coming to get me? I don't know what to do. Why is he not coming to get me? I don't know what to do. And that moment I knew I had to share my message. So I shared my message. And so through this whole process, it created, I think, a lot of family healing, and a lot of healing for me, because I was able to see invalidation in what felt like one of the most critical moments of my life, and the most sensitive situations, because it was with family,
Right.
that I can trust these gifts. And I had really learned to trust them in all areas of my life, but because the stakes felt so high, I was feeling scared to trust it in that situation. And so I trusted it. And then I ended up writing about it. And when I wrote about it, the post that I wrote kind of spread around my family. And then family members started contacting me and saying, you know how you said whenever you would see Grandpa in meditation and in your dreams, he would be on a bench. That's how I would see him. For years. So it was just that, for me, was kind of how the final string fell. I think that somehow my grandparents became really kind of my initiates. They initiated me into this process, and which was really ironic for me, because while they were here and living, spiritually we were very kind of in just very different perspectives. But
It's ironic.
Yes, very ironic.
So as you're describing it, I'm seeing like one of those huge banks vaults, the safes with the thing, and all these things you kept like click. I'm getting a little bit closer, and the lock was opening, and then this was the final one, and like everything fell into place. This is the last, as you said, the last thread, and like this made sense for me personally, spiritually, for my family now, and my family gets it, if you will, or accepts it on some level. I can accept it and don't have to deny it, don't have to be afraid, go for it type of thing. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think, and the thing is honestly, even if they hadn't really fully accepted it, it wouldn't have mattered to me, because I would have known that everything that had happened leading up to it was true. My grandmother, after I gave her the messages that I had been receiving and told her what had happened and gave her guidance about how she could transition, then she ended up falling asleep like right after I had that conversation with her, very peacefully. And about 24 to 48 hours later, she took a turn and she left, and that was it.
Wow.
And so for me, that was, and my aunt, who was there when I had the conversation with her, said that it looked like my grandmother spiritually took this huge exhale. Like there was this weight that was lifted after I had talked to her. So even if my family honestly hadn't accepted it, it wouldn't have mattered. And that's my experience. When we honor ourselves like that, when we really do follow through on our knowing to the best of our ability, and sometimes just kind of step out on almost like on this ledge. Like for me, that was really stepping onto this very exposed ledge, because everyone's emotions were so heightened. Like my dad and my aunts, they were just so really attached to having her stay when I knew she was ready to go. Yeah. And that was part of what was keeping her. And so it felt really risky to step out on that ledge. But my experience is every single time we step out on that ledge, even if things go down in the quote unquote worst case scenario, right? Even if my family had not accepted me, even if they had thought I was crazy, there's still something really powerful and resilient and strength bearing that like flowers inside of you in that moment, that then makes it a situation of, well, this may be painful, but it's just still right. So I'm okay with it. There's a certain level of contentment and peace that you can feel.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful. And right when you said your aunt said the hair was standing on her arms, the hair was standing on my arms, it was like, oh, that's awesome.
Yes.
That's so cool. So I can tell I can talk to you for hours, but I've got to figure out a way to ask to pare down all these questions that are floating through my mind. So I'm just thinking, one of the things you said was, even if the acceptance wasn't there, I knew this was the direction to go. And I sense it. It's almost like the higher truth, the spiritual truth, the loving truth was there that you couldn't deny. And while on an earthly level, on a physical level, maybe others wouldn't accept or understand, but you knew that was in many ways the only choice, if definitely the right choice.
Yes.
And we can, I think, I sense on that what holds us back from listening, tuning into, trusting our intuition are those physical, earthly fears and challenges. Am I right? Like what other people are going to say and think and do. And
yeah, and I think a lot of what I sense from myself and my own journey, and what's happened a lot for my clients, that people, I think, stops people or causes hesitation or resistance towards what we know to be true, is fears around belonging. And am I going to be loved or lovable? And will I still have a place? Will I still have a people? And that's very real, because we're social creatures. And so it is understandable. Like it feels like a very high risk stakes situation. And that was the situation for myself as well. When I left my government job, it felt like a very high stakes situation. I felt like I was going to be judged. And what if I wasn't successful? Then what? Could I end up homeless? That was the question I had, because I was single at the time and I hadn't really financially planned for this move. It just felt like I had to do it. And so, yeah, I always tell people that, it's not that following through on our intuition that then fear just kind of disappears from our life. My experience rather is that intuition and connecting to that clarity can give us some level of strength despite our fear. And it's like the light of our intuition is so big that then the fear can kind of be dispelled in comparison. And it still may be there, like when I had those conversations with my aunt, it's not that I was in complete bliss and oming and, no, my heart was racing, my palms were sweating, I was worried, but I still knew it was the right thing. When I left my government job, leading up to that was like this 2-week paralyzing anxiety situation of total panic and fear. And then sending the message and thinking this is either the craziest thing I've ever done or the best thing I've ever done. And, metaphorically on and off, kind of nail biting and, talking myself off of that fear ledge over and over again, knowing though that deep down inside, it still felt true. And I think that that's important, because I think a lot of times people think, oh, if I follow my intuition, it'll be easy. If I follow my intuition, there won't be fear. not really my experience. It's more like intuition, connecting to it and deciding that that is what's most important for you, because that is what feels most aligned, most free, whatever that is. Then it gives you the courage to move past your fear. And then once that happens and you take that action and it manifests, that what you're kind of following through manifests, then it's worth it. It's worth the kind of the cliff edge walking.
Yeah. The leap, the walking on the edge, the risk.
Yes.
I love that. Thanks for that reminder that, it's not all, prancing through the flower beds.
No,
It can
that's
be a
not
little,
my experience anyways.
can be a little scary. So you said something early on that I think, is a good reminder, that you'll have people say, oh, I'm not intuitive, or I'm not very intuitive. And I don't remember who said it to me or why, but if we look at all the number of times in our lives where we might not consider we're following intuition, but just what pops into my head is even just driving, we are trusting a lot of people. We're making decisions based on our intuition. That person isn't going to come into my lane. That person's going to do this, or just little things that we do, decisions that we make. We could go left or right or up or down or yes or no. We don't remember that that's intuition. We're following this little bit of our, as you say it, we've Googled into, our inner GPS.
Yes.
So we
Yeah,
all
I
have
love
it.
that example.
Yeah, we all have it. Very cool. So the other thing I would love a little help on differentiating is intuition and empathy or psychic ability. I like to say that I feel like I'm intuitive on some levels, but I'm not very, like, I hear about you, like that communication with grandpa and seeing that, I'm like, oh, that'd be cool. And yet the other part, I think it'd be challenging. Like, you hear people who are very psychic like you, and I think there's a bit of a burden with it. And so I'm kind of glad I don't have that. So how does that divide, and, what's the difference type of thing?
Yeah, it is a responsibility. It is. Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of people think that opening up to their intuition is, rainbows and unicorns. And mine has been a little bit more like Dark Night of the Soul, Phoenix Rising
Yeah.
situation. So, but it's been worth it. I mean, I wouldn't change anything. And for me, the empathy question is a good one. I think a lot of people are empathic, and folks who are really empathic can have some psychic abilities, which is the ability to actually have that inner feeling sense, right? So you may actually be able to pick up, and that's the thing, intuition speaks in so many different languages. So that's one of the things I like to teach people is how does your intuition uniquely speak to you, and decode that language, because it's not so obvious. It can be subtle, and so it's important to recognize that when people are talking about empathy, that my sense is that oftentimes they're talking about really that inner, that like the inner sight example, but through inner feeling, they can have an inner sense of what someone is feeling as if it is their own. They're able to read that person. That is an intuitive and psychic gift. And for me, when it goes from intuition, I tell people sometimes when it goes from like intuition to maybe what we might call psychic, I just distinguish it as, more of a sense of practice or mastery. Is it something that happens on an ad hoc basis and accidentally to you, or is it something that happens kind of more consistently? And most of all, do you have masterful sense of it? Because folks who are very empathic, which that's definitely me. For me, all of my senses are basically turned up to 1,000. And so it's been this whole process of mastery has been learning that I don't have to leave it at 1,000, that I can decide, I can learn how to, through practice, kind of work with that inner dial inside and turn that up and down. And I can therefore walk around the world and not have to feel like I have to feel all the people all the time, because that's really honestly how it was for me for a long time. And I had no clue. I just thought, well, shoot, I just feel a lot.
Yeah. It's the way I am, nothing I can do, and yet you now realize otherwise.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the
So
way you are, but there is something you can do.
yes. So that's for me the difference. And then when we're talking about intuition, when we're talking about intuitive, then intuitive may be not just the feeling sense, but you may have other senses like inner sight. One of the first senses that I didn't know I was tapping into was inner smell, clairsentient. I was able to smell, that's how my first experience, one of my first experiences with my grandfather was actually smelling him.
That's
As
awesome.
if he was literally standing right next to me. It was a very confusing experience. And I kept smelling him every time he would visit me. So some folks may have that. They may have taste. Taste is another one that people don't realize. They'll be sitting somewhere and then suddenly they just taste something different. Now, pending, of course, if there's a medical issue, that's a different story. But if you don't have a medical concern and then suddenly you're tasting something that's not there, like for me, there was this period of time where sometimes I would taste like grape candy, like from my childhood, like the grape candy, and that would have a specific meaning. So that's, for me, intuitive is recognizing that actually we have all these different channels. Just like we have the five senses, we have all these inner senses, and that's how we actually receive more subtle information from ourselves, from our spirit teams, from our guides around us, from picking up on information and codes from the people around us. That's not like a rational thing. And then moving into more of what we would call psychic, is then just, again, another level of mastery where it's not ad hoc. It's actually consistent. It's like stabilized, the experience is more stabilized, it's more grounded, and you're able to work with healthy boundaries is a big thing, like learning how to master healthy boundaries. Because if I experienced life all the time, like how I have at different periods of my life where I didn't understand the dimmer switch, I think I would have gotten really worn out, because it was a lot of information. I had information coming in through all of my inner senses. I had spirits visiting me in my dreams all the time, physically in my house all the time. Like, stuff was, I would just joke that things would just move in my apartment. I'd be like, oh, somebody else showed up for work today, somebody else. And it metaphorically was like I had a queue, it felt like a queue of spirits, like outside my door, like, okay, Marci's on, and it's like, I didn't know that I could turn it on and off and be like, no, we're done for the day. Business closed. Or I don't see this kind of I don't see this kind of case. I see this kind of case. And it used to happen to me on vacation. I would travel on vacation, and then I'll never forget, my partner and I traveled back to his home country, which is in Colombia. And we were visiting this area. And when we were staying at the hotel, in the middle of the night, I heard these weird, like, animal like noises that weren't animals. Like, I could tell like a human was making an animal noise trying to get someone's attention, our attention, literally right outside our door. And then a drum, like a traditional drum, over and over again. And I was like, what is going on? We woke up the next day, and I was like, I asked the people at the hotel, hey, was anybody playing a drum last night? Was trying to describe the noise. Is this an animal you're familiar with? No. We go into the forest, and I just start feeling like angry, and I recognize like that the anger I'm feeling is so big, there's no reason why I would feel this right now. So I was trying to figure out what was happening, and then we got to this one place in this kind of jungle that they were guiding us through on the land, and he said, oh, and this is the this is the area, the burial site, where the shaman, this used to be a sacred site for shamans where they did spiritual rituals. And this is where we found one of their burial sites. And we dug up the graves, and there was like lots of treasure. And immediately I knew, oh, these spirits are super, super unhappy. They see me and they say, they're trying to let me know how unhappy they are, and to be a vessel for them to say, what you did was not right. So, and then turns out literally right outside our door was one of those artifacts from that grave.
Wow.
And I had no idea. And so, so even things like that, it would just happen to me all the time. So I had to learn how to modulate, because I can't help everyone, and I can't work 24/7. And that's kind of what was happening for a long time.
Yeah. You need to be able to turn the closed sign up or on.
Yes. Yes.
So you're talking about getting those messages. It reminds me of, previous guest on the Mind Flipping podcast is Mark Gober. Mark wrote The End of Upside Down Thinking. And I'm going to get his subtitle wrong. It's basically why ending the myth that consciousness comes from our brain. And among the metaphors, that he talked about that describe our ability to tap into consciousness that's there before we were and after our brain, before our brain is alive and after our brain dies, is the kind of the antenna, metaphor. And it's like some people, we all have an antenna. We all have the ability to tap into, to your level, precognition, or to other levels, intuition or answers beyond us. And is this a good description? Like perhaps these spirits where you were saw that here's somebody whose antenna is on. We need to get her attention. She'll hear us, type of thing. Or she's tuned into us.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Okay.
They knew that I was, and that's the case. It's not that they were trying to scare me or bother me. It's rather they were exactly like you're describing, these beings that had been on this land, where this land clearly was sacred to them and had been, defiled in many ways, disrespected. There was
Right.
no conversation about, or any ritual to discuss and explore. Can we explore this archaeologically? Can we take these artifacts and preserve them in a museum? Like that, there was complete disrespect. So they saw my antenna, and my partner doesn't really have his antenna up, so they saw my giant antenna and they went, she will know how to convey our message. She will know how to help some of us that are trapped here, that need to transition still. Like there was like a long list. I kind of felt like metaphorically, like they came in with the binder, like, got it. Here's what we got. We've been waiting for you for a while. We've been waiting for someone to come through for you, like you. Because most of us don't even recognize that there's this antenna, right? And so that was my experience, is once you kind of open the antenna, and I kind of learned things, I would say, in reverse order, right? It's kind of like I wasn't intending to open my antenna. All of a sudden my antenna was really open, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then just kind of kept stretching longer, and the neon sign kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then on the other side of it, I had to learn how to work with boundaries and stuff like that, which is why when I talk to clients about it, I kind of start with boundary stuff and then work with opening up in an intentional way, because I had to learn it backwards. And because I had to learn it backwards, it was quite difficult. And so absolutely those beings were just saw the neon sign and sought help. And because I'm a healer also, then folks, they know that I have this natural propensity, and that used to also show up for me a lot in the past, a lot with human relationships. A lot of people who were needing very deep emotional healing work would seek that, kind of be drawn like a moth to a flame, through friendship with me or dating and things like that. So I went through also all this long process of trying to clear that up, so I wasn't the healer of all these people in my life and could actually have mutually supportive relationships. So in the same way, I had to kind of clean up the intuitive space and develop mutually supportive relationships.
Awesome. Makes sense. And for our listeners, you can go to the Mind Flipping website, mindflipping.com. There's going to be show notes. We'll have links about different things. And later, Marci's got a little giveaway. There will also be a link, and I'm promising this. I'm not promising when, but I'll put a video up so you can see a bunch of things. You can see our conversation in addition to hearing it. And you may be wondering, is that the sound of speckling, or is it the sound of spirits in the background? And I think it's neither. It's your parrot.
It is my parrot. I have a parrot, and I have a parrot, and I have a dog. I have two little beings that live with me and literally talk in the background, metaphorically, like how spirit talks to me.
Yeah, except they're live animals. I love it. Oh, speaking of the spackle round, there it is, the sound of spackle. So we will get a little bit of a spackle round in, and I say a little bit because I want to follow through on my promise to Marci not to talk forever. So
it's great. I'm enjoying this.
thank you. Thank you. And so are you ready for the spackle round, Marci?
Yes, I am.
All right, awesome. Let's jump into some spackle round questions. So let's see. Spackle round question number 1. What excites you now?
Plants. I
Oh,
would say what excites me is plants. I have been in this process this year really of connecting with plants in more of a spiritual way, and it has been changing me in remarkable ways that I kind of can't explain, and also makes a lot of sense to me. I have relied a lot on plants through tincture or herbal supplements and things like that, because I have Lyme disease, and those actually have had the greatest effect on continuing to help me heal that chronic illness. And so, as intuition would have it, I ended up connecting with a teacher this year who teaches more of an intuitive perspective on plants. And that really has kind of brought another spirit realm into, I suppose, my wheelhouse. And I've just been loving it and enjoying having the times that I take the tincture for my illness to just also be a spiritual experience. And I also am growing plants now. I have lots of medicinal herbs on my deck, and I'm enjoying creating a very personal relationship with them. It's been really profound.
wow, I love it. And I'm smiling, and I got the goosebumps because here's another way we're connected. I earlier in the year, I think it might have been Carrie, my wonderful podcast editor, that put something on Facebook. What are your intentions for the year? And it might not have been her, but somebody said, what are you looking forward to this year? And I don't know why, but I wrote spending more time with trees. I mean, I kind of know why, because I like trees, but why did I write that? And so it's been floating in my mind this year. And I was walking my dog the other day, and we went through some trees, and it's the best thing, being with trees. I get excited seeing trees and their dance. And so I'm with you. They excite me too. Plants excite me.
Yeah, they're amazing beings. I mean, they can communicate too, and they are communicating to us. And I have found, since starting to connect to them, that they are very wise and generous beings in ways that I'm just continually blown away by. And so, looking out my window, I have a tree literally right in front of my window, and she and I have a deep relationship. And so I always say hi to her, and I give her offerings of water and give her like flowers and things like that. Because we don't think of them as, kind of in the same way as animals, because they don't like pick up their roots and start walking around.
Right.
But they're amazingly intelligent. And I've just enjoyed learning both the science around that and kind of more of the spiritual intuitive angle of that, and how the two of them mirror each other so well.
I love it. I get it. I'm with you. It's very cool. And I'm thinking to myself, jokingly, and this isn't about you, this is about me. We probably just lost a few listeners. People just turned off. Now they're talking about plants. But I know energetically and spiritually, we've gained a few listeners, and I'm okay with the plus or minus. It doesn't matter, because it's
well, and here's what I would say for those folks that are wondering whether they should stay connected or not. There is something called Plant FM, which is super cool. It is this company, I think they're based out in LA, but they've made electrodes that they can connect to plants. And they have found that plants have different sound frequencies. They translate it into sound. And I have a friend who lives in London, and she's at a big meditation studio there, and they connected these electrodes to their plants because they've just been experimenting with it. They've been curious about it. And what they found was that this one orchid that they had connected it to would change its frequency. Like it would sound like it was getting happy when certain people would walk into the room, and then she said there was just one person in this workshop that the plant clearly did not like, because every single time that person would come into the room, she's like, the best way I can describe it is it sounded like the plant was grumbling to itself.
Wow.
Like what was being transmitted through those electrodes was like this low, muffled, kind of like grumbly tone. And then when that person would leave the room, it would kind of come back up again. And I just find it fascinating. And of course, there's been so many interesting experiments around that, from, children saying I love you to a plant over and over again, and then to another classroom saying I hate you, and the one that they're saying I hate you to dies, and the one that they say I love you to over and over again thrives. So yeah, I invite people to explore it, and Plant FM is just super cool.
Plant FM. Awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll put a link for that in the show notes. And I'm reminded of, the reality is we're all just energy, and among the things that transmit and facilitate energy is water. And as what was his name? I was looking it up. Masaru Emoto, who did the experiments with water and how you talk to it, and how much of plants are water, a lot, like us. So
like us, yeah,
right,
exactly. And we, in this modern day, we think of it as crazy, but if we trace everyone's lineage back across the world, regardless of continent, this was a fundamental belief that was a fabric of society. Everyone understood that all living beings had sentience, and that there was the same level of deep intelligence. And it's almost like trees were so much more wise because they formed into this body that they can't move and animate in the same way. And therefore, that's why there was this understanding that we had this very deep relationship where we were there to caretake for them, while they were also there as wise teachers for us. So this is something that's existed in every continent and every culture as a universal, one of the few like universal teachings over and over again. It's just that we as a society, very hyper kind of vigilantly focused on the rational side of us, only think like, well, I can't, we can't prove it. And even though we have so many experiments that do show evidence of this,
yep,
it's again, just because you can't quote unquote prove something and repeat it to the nth degree doesn't make it not real. I mean, we see that all the time. There's lots of people that have experience. Can you prove love? No, but everyone experiences love. So what about that?
Yeah, very true. Fantastic. All right, so we've got time for one more Speck Around question, and for the first time ever, I'm picking the question and I'm picking the answer. I just want you to help me with it. Does that sound all right?
Yes.
So the regular listeners will recognize, well, first of all, the Speck Around, if you're a new listener, is that time where we fill in holes for our listener. And the Mind Flipping podcast is a play on house flipping and renovating and updating our homes. We can and do renovate and update our minds and then our lives. And so a spackle is the soft stuff that fills in the holes in walls when you pull a nail out. So we're going to typically in this podcast, the Speck Around fills in holes. And one of the common questions is I ask my guests for a word or phrase of the day that they'd like to share. And you've shared it on your website. It's a Rumi quote. So I'm just going to ask you I won't ask you to repeat it because, that would be like going back in your memory. And if your memory's like mine, it's not always accurate.
Yes.
So I wrote it down, and I'll ask you just to respond to it. I love, Rumi. And so the quote you have on your website is, "Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. You are the universe in ecstatic motion." I love that. You stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. Why did you put that on your website? What does it mean to you?
I put it on my website because one of my patterns that I've been healing from for a long time is making myself small. And part of making myself small was a coping mechanism from my past, because I come from a history of childhood chronic complex trauma and sexual abuse. And so that's one of the things that I have been in focus of trying to really allow myself to be quote unquote big. And I love that quote from Romy, because it's this recognition that is inherently who we are. We are inherently this very vast, mysterious, being. And because of that, that's why this intuitive nature that we're speaking about today is our birthright. I really believe that it is our birthright. It is part of how we are fundamentally made up. It is part of who we fundamentally all are. And that's important because, especially in a day and age where we have social media and you can have comparison, it can be easy to slip into this place of thinking that you are smaller or making yourself smaller than someone else. But something that my dad said, that his dad said, that's always stuck with me is everybody puts their pants on the same way, you know? And for me, that's kind of like the layman's term of kind of underneath what Rumi's saying, which is don't act so small. You know, you actually, there's this huge potential inside of you. And on top of it, all of us have that potential. It's not that some people are special and they have more potential than others. It's rather that we all have this vastness inside of us. And it's really, I think the path is about getting out of our own way, which is, as I've shared, what has been really hard for me. It was really hard for me to get out of my own way and allow myself to be a vessel for these gifts that want to move through me and to serve others.
Well, thank you for sharing not only the quote, but your personal story. And I think we can relate to it. You know, it's fantastic how you put it, you know, the fact that, yes, in this day and age of social media, it's easy to look at the posts of fun and joy. And I'm as guilty, my wife and I are as guilty. You know, we like to celebrate our good times and we'll post that and think nobody wants to see the not so good times. And there's probably some truth to that. But when we see that, we can feel less than by comparison, which is naturally feeling smaller. And for you, somebody, you know, with your challenges growing up, being small was safer.
Yes.
You know, and yet I love to hear that you step into the truth that our design is to tap into our intuition. And it's not just you, it's not just me, but it's all of us. It's all of our design. And don't fight it, but step into that ecstatic motion that we all have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very well said. I agree.
Awesome. Well, you said it, so thank you.
Well, thanks for repeating it back, because that's important, right? It helps to really sink in. Sometimes we have to hear things multiple times. And that quote from Rumi is one that I've heard and I've read and I've seen a million times. And every time you can, I feel like I connect into like another deeper layer underneath it when I hear it.
Me as well. Well, let's begin to wrap up. And to do that, you did say before we clicked record that you did have something exciting coming up that you wanted to share with our listeners.
Yes, I do. I have a course coming up that is available. It is an online course with live sessions paired with a group process where we can support each other through practices, and there's group discussion and an online platform that is called Intuition 101, and it is my life-changing practical course on intuition development. So if anything that your listeners have been listening to today has sparked interest in them, to reconnect to that intuitive nature, to understand how they can start to really deeply trust their own guidance, how they may be able to start to deeply trust some guidance coming from, you know, their spirit guides or ancestors. That course is very, very foundational and walks through step by step how you can open up to your intuition and how to do so in a safe way. As I mentioned before, boundaries, I believe, are really important. So that's something that I emphasize, and I teach very specific practices around that. And even if people are already open to their intuition, I've had a lot of folks go through the course also who are, you know, professional healers, and they also get a lot of benefit out of it, because we can always refine that skill and there's always something new that we can learn. So it's a great experience, and it happens over about a 7-week period where we meet together virtually online.
So the best way to get information on that, we can put a link in the show notes. Is that right?
Yes, and if people go to marcimoberg.com, that's really my website, my first and last name.com. That's the easiest way to find that. And if folks go on there, they'll be prompted, if they want, to send, to give their email address. And if they join my email address, my newsletter list, then they'll also get updates when registration happens, as well as the first overview lesson. So the very first kind of pre-lesson to the course, they'll be able to receive access to that, which will give them a sense of what's the course like? What kind of content are we going to cover? And in one of my first practices, I share a first practice with them that they can start to implement immediately.
Awesome. So as we were comparing calendars before we clicked record, this should be airing right about near the end of enrollment. So if you're listening to this in the first week that it launched, and I know you may be listening to it long after, and still check out Marci's website at marcimoberg.com. But if you caught this in the first week, head over right away to get more information. You know, Marci's done a fantastic job of just being herself, of being authentic. And so if your intuition is telling you, this is somebody I want to spend time with, this is somebody that I know I can learn more truths from, then don't delay, head over there ASAP. So Marci, thank you so much for, being authentic, for being vulnerable, for sharing, your past, your present, your future. And I want you to know that not only do I love you, but I appreciate you and all that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had such a fun time chatting today. I really appreciate this platform you've created. It's important.
The pleasure is all mine.